Mr. President, first of all, I want to thank Senator Murray and the Budget Committee for producing a budget that says loudly and clearly that our #1 priority is to fight for a stronger middle class, even as we dramatically reduce budgets and stabilize the debt by the end of the decade. I also applaud Senator Murray and the Budget Committee for producing a budget resolution that insists on a balanced approach to deficit reduction, both spending cuts and revenue increases, both. I also want to applaud my colleague, Senator Levin, for his leadership on using his investigating subcommittee, his permanent committee on investigations, to bring to light over the last few years the number of and the egregious tax spending that we're doing through loopholes that allow corporations and others to get by without paying their fair share of taxes. Senator Levin has long fought to bring fairness to the tax code, and his investigations have shown that one of the major things we have to do is to close up some of those egregious loopholes. Now, my colleague from Iowa was just talking. He said, he pointed out the years that we balanced the budget. I would note those were the years when we had a Democratic president, President Clinton. We were working off of the 1993 deal that was made to both reduce spending and increase revenues. We had a growth in the economy. We had low unemployment. We balanced the budget for 5 years in a row. Now, during that time, our revenues averaged about 20% of our gross domestic product. Now it's down to less than 18%. So, and we also know that demographics, including the tens of millions of baby boomers becoming eligible for Social Security and Medicare, will place vast new demands on our budget. At the same time, we need to make investments in infrastructure, research, education to prepare our young people and our economy for the competitive global economy that's coming. I remind my colleagues that when President George W. Bush's tax cut was passed in 2001, it was defended on the grounds that it was only going to take a small part of the projected surpluses that we were going to have for the next 10 years. That's what it was said. Well, as we now know, those surpluses didn't materialize. We had the tax cuts. We had 2 unpaid-for wars that completely wiped out the expected surpluses, and yet we kept those big tax cuts going. And that created big deficits. And then the onslaught of the Great Recession in 2008 pushed our deficits even higher. And today only 1/8 of the revenues lost by the Bush tax cuts have been restored. 1/8. 1/8. Yet, many of the Republicans keep repeating their mantra that we only have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. This is demonstrably not the case. Now, we go back in time when I was here when President Reagan pushed through some tax cuts when he came in as president. But I would say to his credit, he realized they went too far. So he reversed course and supported 2 income tax increases. Well, in looking back just 12 years ago, President George W. Bush's tax cuts also went too far, again, contributing to the largest deficit in our history. Well, you'd think that we would want to reverse course, but Republicans have dogmatically refused to reverse course on increasing revenues. They stick to their ideological mantra. They say don't touch tax breaks for the wealthy and the largest corporations. Instead, cut the programs that undergird the middle class and meet the needs of our most vulnerable citizens. They demand that we slash funding for infrastructure, innovation, and education only to keep tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Now, Mr. President, there are abundant opportunities for cutting waste, cutting spending, but on both sides. Yes, we need spending cuts, but cutting spending by closing tax provisions in the tax code that hurt our economy. That's where we need to cut some spending, tax spending that goes to the wealthiest and goes to large corporations. Let me just cite a few examples. Consider the so-called deferral provision governing taxation of profits earned by U.S. companies overseas. Now, follow this. A U.S. company can deduct the cost of doing a business or starting a business overseas, building a facility. They can deduct the cost of shipping equipment to that plant, even if it comes from America. But the tax code then allows these companies to delay paying taxes on these profits until those profits are brought back home. So on the one hand, they get tax breaks for building a plant overseas. They get other tax breaks for shipping the jobs overseas. They get tax breaks for shipping equipment that could be used in America overseas. Those are immediate. They get those tax breaks right now. But then when that plant earns profits, they're not taxed until and unless they bring those back home. Now, this is totally unfair to a U.S. manufacturer, say one with a factory in Iowa or in New Mexico, to pay their taxes at a full and fair rate. And the lost revenue is unfair to Americans who play by the rules, pay their full taxes, and yes, Americans who rely on essential government services. Here's another one. U.S. companies can sell their patents to subsidiaries, their own subsidiaries, with an overseas postal address in a country with low tax rates. The parent company is paid to use the patent, generating profits for the company. But the taxes on those profits are not paid as long as the money is technically in the subsidiary's account, even if the money is deposited in a U.S. bank. Consider another tax outrage. We all know it by the name carried interest. Well, what does that mean? It means if you're an individual fortunate enough to make, say, $10 million a year, you pay income taxes at the rate of 39.6%. But if you were a hedge fund manager and you made that $10 million managing a hedge fund and you never even invested a penny, you get taxed at 20%. Not 39.6, but at 20%, the capital gains rate for most of your income. Well, why is that? Well, there is no rational reason. That was just put into the tax code, I guess, by some great tax lobbyists who were hired by the hedge fund industry. So, Mr. President, these gimmicks and these tax breaks cost the Treasury untold billions of dollars. They serve no constructive economic purpose. In fact, they give incentives to corporations to make decisions that harm the U.S. economy and American workers. By ending these abuses, we can generate needed revenue while creating a fairer tax code, one that does not reward corporations and the wealthy for behaviors that put the rest of us at an unfair disadvantage. So when I hear someone say, well, we're going to have tax reform, but it must be revenue neutral, what I hear is let's keep all the tax loopholes for the wealthy and these large corporations. And I say it's time to end those. We need that revenue for education, for reinvesting in the infrastructure of our country, for biomedical research, for science research. We need it to make sure that our young people today are able to compete in this global economy in the future. Mr. President, compromise, common sense, and good faith negotiations are what we need today. We do not need someone saying, no, we cannot raise revenues. All we got to do is cut spending. On our side, under the leadership of Senator Murray, we have said we'll cut spending, but we'll also raise revenues. We'll have a balanced approach. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this budget resolution, to say no to all these amendments that would upset what I think is a very good, solid budget resolution put forward by Senator Murray and the committee. Let's put dogma aside. Let's act rationally and reasonably, and let's come together for a balanced, responsible solution to our nation's budget challenges. Mr. President, I yield the floor.